Hello. This past week I visited my parents in Las Vegas.
Hello, the internet.
And I know what you're thinking. But it's not like that. My parents live in a Vegas suburb where normal people live, and I also went up there to take a look at some new recording equipment for this channel. If all goes well, we'll soon be hooked up for live streaming segments where you can ask me and my guests questions in real time, and we'll do our best to answer them for you in real time. Do you like that idea? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so you're up and running with Rancher and Kubernetes, and you're ready to get busy. Rancher gives you an amazing UI that streamlines pretty much every workflow you'll encounter with Kubernetes, but sometimes you're still going to access Kubernetes via the command line. There are just some things that are faster to do with kubectl, like getting node and pod names, tailing logs, deleting things, and a fair bit of troubleshooting when you have to do it across different Kubernetes resources. If you've ever attended one of my online Intro to Kubernetes training courses, you know that I am a firm believer in optimization. For me, it's a simple line in the sand. If I have to do something more than twice, I script it or automate it, or I put it on a hotkey button. Oh, check this out. I just got this. I wasn't sure that I would use it, but literally within seconds of plugging it in, it became indispensable. Seriously, buy one. Elgato pitches it as something for content creators like me to use with streaming, but it's so much more than that. You can basically hotkey anything that you can do with your computer. CLI commands, multi-stage actions, text, keyboard shortcuts, open web pages, run commands inside of programs. It's ridiculous. Heck, you could even use it to run Kubernetes commands if you want to. And if you're on a Mac, the latest version of Keyboard Maestro natively supports the Stream Deck. I'll put a link for it in the description. Just buy one and thank me later. So, automation, optimization. Today I'm going to show you how to make the best configuration for running kubectl, switching between clusters, and navigating inside of them. Now, I'm sorry that this stuff won't apply to Windows users, because the best utilities for interacting with Kubernetes don't exist for Windows. You can still watch the video and see what's out there if you want to install a Linux virtual machine onto your Windows box, with which you can interact with Kubernetes clusters. Honestly, this isn't about Windows versus Mac versus Linux. It's about being able to do what needs to get done. Ready? So the first thing that you need to do is install kubectl. There's like a gajillion tutorials on how to do that all over the internet, so I'm just going to assume that you've already got it installed. Kubectl uses a config file that by default is stored in .kube/config in your home directory. Although kubectl looks for that file by default, it will prefer the content of the kubeconfig environment variable. You can set this to any file, either as a permanent variable or as a one-off when using something in the current directory, for example. What happens when you start managing different clusters? You could just edit the config file to combine different configuration files into one, but that's a huge pain in the you-know-what. Whenever I encounter something that makes me feel like it's not optimal, I remember that I'm never the first person to have encountered any problem. We can always find a better way. The first thing that I recommend you do is put each cluster's configuration file into its own file in the .kube directory. Name them something that makes sense to you, like config.eks.yaml. Giving them a .yaml extension means that you can double-click on them to open them in a text editor like Visual Studio Code, and then you just point the kubeconfig variable at all of them with each file separated by a colon. Smart, right? But it's not enough. You can put them all into your shell initialization file, but then you're editing it every time you want to add a new config. We want something better, so we're going to script it. Here's a script for fish that you can drop into your fish config file. The same script for bash looks like this. Don't worry about having to copy these from the video. If you look in the description, I'll have a link to a gist where I'll put all of these commands and scripts. One of the things that's great about Rancher is its ability to manage multiple clusters. Within each cluster, you'll find a kubeconfig file that you can copy to your local machine. When you want to talk to a different cluster, you just switch to a different config. All of the communication is still proxied through the Rancher server, so it handles all of the authentication before passing the traffic to the cluster for everything else. But how do you switch between config files? Each config file has a cluster, a user, and then a context that combines cluster, user, and namespace. You can switch between them by telling Kubernetes which one to use. To do this, you type kubectl config use context foo, where foo is the name of the context that you want to use. Now, that's better, but it's still not enough. Do you know how many characters are in that command? 27. What if we could get it down to 3? For that, we're going to turn to a command called kubectl, created by Ahmet Alp-Balkan. kubectl is a bash script that shortens kubectl config use context into a single command. It also enables switching to the previous profile by typing kubectl-, and you can use it to alias crazy long context names into short, easy to remember names that are also way easier to type. You can install kubectl via Homebrew on the Mac, or you can install it directly from his GitHub repo. I'll put a link in the description. What's that you say? kubectl is more than 3 characters? Fear not, young Padawan. We have a solution. We want to use technology to live a better life. Getting carpal tunnel syndrome does not satisfy that requirement. So what's the rule from earlier? Anything that I have to type more than twice, I script or I automate, right? Well, I also do my best to shorten it. So let's just alias kubectl to be KCC. And while we're at it, let's add a bunch more aliases. kubectl get nodes can be KGNO. kubectl get pods can be KGPO. Some people alias kubectl itself to K, but I don't like single character aliases. I prefer to use KC instead. How about kubectl get? KG. kubectl exec? KEX. And so on. Here's a list of the aliases that I currently use, and if I find myself frequently typing something that isn't in that list, I just add it. I imagine this is how Ahmet found himself with his alias list, which if you ask me is just crazy. I don't know where this dude works or what he does with Kubernetes, but the fact that he can even remember all of these aliases?
Respect.
Use the aliases that make sense for you, and treat the list like a houseplant. Water it and prune it, and it will bring you joy. What about the last part of the Kubernetes config file? Each context also contains a namespace. If you don't know about namespaces, they're a logical grouping of named resources within a Kubernetes cluster. Once you start using them to collect resources, you'll find yourself always switching between them. Pretty soon, you'll find yourself using clusters where you might not even know or remember what namespaces exist, so you'll end up running kubectl get namespaces, followed by kubectl config set context -- current -- namespace. You know what? No. Ahmet the Awesome has given us the kubens command, which I've aliased to ns. It behaves like kubectl, where you can switch back and forth between namespaces, but it also integrates with fcf. fcf is another slick utility that does a fuzzy find of input, filtering the results as you type. If you haven't installed it on your machine, you definitely need to install it. It will change your life. So we can now type ns and press enter and be presented with a list of namespaces. We can either go up and down the list to find our namespace, or we can start typing any characters in it and FCF will filter the list. Once our namespace is selected, we press enter, and now we're operating in that namespace. So let's recap. I use multiple kubectl config files in the .kube directory, and those are concatenated by a script and loaded into the kubeconfig environment variable. I have a bunch of aliases for kubectl commands that I use often, including KCC, which is an alias for kubectl to switch between contexts. I use kubens, aliased as ns, to switch between namespaces in a particular cluster. Do you know of any other great tools for optimizing your Kubernetes workflow? If so, please let me know in the comments. I'm down for anything that makes my Kubernetes life easier. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. And be sure to click that bell thing so you get notified when a new video comes out. I release new videos every week, and if there's something that you would like to see, please let me know in the comments and I'll see about getting it into the queue. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.